on an ISO standard, ISO 14083. And that will take the content of the Glec framework and use that as one of the primary inputs into this new standard. And that standard will cover not only freight transport, but passenger transport as well. Within the Glec framework, it was first published in 2016, but we do continue to look at updates as scientific knowledge improves, consensus with industry and the discussions we have evolve, and the digital transfer and the sort of things that Lucas from Transporeon will be talking about later also come more and more to the fore. We need to make sure that that is brought in to the way that the calculation methodology can work in the future. We've worked very hard to liaise with a range of strategic partners on the Glec framework to ensure official recognition by the main global greenhouse gas reporting mechanisms, such as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. The Glec framework carries the built-on GHG protocol mark, but also embedding with CDP, Science-Based Targets Initiative, mentions in the UN's Climate and Clean Air Coalition and their global green freight program. So no, really important to try to embed a single methodology. And the uptake is really growing now. This 170 plus multinational figure, we could probably update that monthly these days, just is the extent of the growth. And it's also worth noting now more than 20 programs, tools and other initiatives that have embedded the Glec framework into their provisions in one way or another. And this really is the core of what we call our calculate and report work stream. The Glec framework itself, the structure of it is really there to support industry. We've had a lot of industry input into the content, and it's designed to be a step-by-step guide to the calculation, but written in a way that industry can relate to. Not excessively prescriptive, not excessively mathematical, but approaching it in a way that an organisation should be able to read, relate to, and work out its role in terms of how to calculate the emissions. Alongside the core content for the calculation and reporting, we also have a number of appendices and modules which provide a lot of reference data for calculation. Things like standard emission factors, and then fuel and CO2 equivalent intensity values for different types of transport. And we explain a little bit about why they're there in due course. At Smart Freight Centre, we do also provide some training courses, and I've got a slide on that at the end for those who wish to know more. So in terms of setting the boundaries, what you should include in your calculation, as I say, a lot of this is really aligned with the likes of Greenhouse Gas Protocol, CDP, etc. So it's designed to cover all modes within the supply chain, and also to include logistics sites that link together the modes, and also even legs for the same mode. So think container terminals, warehouses, transshipment centres. They should all be included within the calculation. Similarly, all categories of relevant direct and indirect emissions as defined in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol scopes 1, 2 and 3. And we cover all the climate pollutants related to freight transport. So you've got the 7 primary greenhouse gases referred to by the UN FCCC as having a significant role in contributing to climate change. There are some other items that may contribute additional climate impacts for logistics activities. They are generally excluded from the Glec framework at the moment for reasons of data availability or practicality, or in some cases still lack of a commonly agreed way to include them, thinking particularly about radiative forcing for air transport. We do have a supplement, which is the black carbon methodology for the logistics sector, which is particularly relevant for some of the heavier fossil fuels and impacts that occur primarily in the Arctic or in and around high mountains, where you impact on the ability of white surfaces to reflect radiation. And then in terms of the way that that this pulls together, carbon dioxide comprises the majority of greenhouse gas emissions from the sector, certainly when we're dealing with fossil fuels. And so that's the standard reference point by which emissions are referred to. So that's the CO2 equivalent, which is used to represent global warming impact of the various greenhouse gases and used as that common metric throughout the framework. And then the final aspect is that the full fuel cycle should be included to ensure that, particularly for newer fuels, the impacts in the production phase are not ignored in an overall system approach. Electricity is the obvious example of this, where you have zero emission at point of use. But no, for electricity and also other fuels such as biofuels, fuels with waste fractions in the feedstock, etc. The balance between the fuel production and the fuel combustion contribution to the overall impact can vary considerably. And if you want to have a true understanding of the impact of your choices, then you really need to include these in your calculations. So if you as an organisation are interested to know what parts of the transport chain you should consider, well, I think the answer is really, ideally, as much as you can, your full supply chain, including inbound, intersite, outbound, final third-party distribution. Now, obviously, some of these you'll have a much better insight into than others, but it's really important to at least make a guesstimate for each part and those that you don't have so much insight into, because you can always refine that with your partners at a later date. And when it comes to what to calculate and then report, the headline at this point is that the two main KPIs that should be calculated hand in hand are the total logistics greenhouse gas emissions, because obviously that's what we want to get to zero as soon as possible, but also an emission intensity KPI, preferably expressed in ton kilometers for a transport company or per unit for a manufacturer or a shipper. And there are really, when we set it out in simple terms, 4 steps towards calculating your emissions. The first step is to collect your data. And the scope that you're working is likely to really determine that the way that you perform the calculation according to that data that you have available to you. We would expect that if you own the vehicles or operate the vehicles or the terminal, then you would have access to the fuel or the energy data, and you would also know some of the details about what actually you're using. Have you signed a contract to access green electricity? Are you just using grid electricity, for example, at your warehouse? Or have you signed a deal to buy a particular type of biofuel which has a non-standard emission factor? These are all things that you need to take into account, combined with that fuel and energy use, to calculate your emissions. And once you've got that calculation in step 2, you should be thinking about then actually also working out your intensity value. Again, either using the ton kilometers or another appropriate divisor, depending on your role. We do find that even well-equipped carriers may need to subcontract some of the transport legs, so they may not necessarily know entirely the full fuel use directly. So even there, they may need to collect data from their suppliers. Whereas in the case of many shippers, manufacturers, etc., you'll be primarily collecting information from your suppliers, either directly in the form of a calculation or enough to enable you to do that yourself. And it's really important to understand all that, bring it together into that intensity value, because that's really how you're going to judge how efficient you are, particularly as business volumes fluctuate, and how you're doing in terms of meeting a trajectory for climate targets in the sector. If you're looking at a multimodal transport chain, you really want to build that picture leg by leg of your journeys in a sort of bottom-up process. If you're solely purchasing transport, you can try to work at that level, but you may actually need to access data from suppliers at a more contract level. But in that case, it's really important to be clear what data you expect to receive, and also to be sure of the accuracy. And that's where external validation services become important, as well as harmonized reporting formats. So setting that core element out, that phase 2 from the previous slide, really when you're looking at scope 1 or scope 2 emissions that directly relates to fuel use or electricity use, it's a relatively straightforward process. If you have that data, to align it with an emission factor, the carrier should be able to do that, come up with a total greenhouse gas emission. The challenge comes more for buyers of freight transport, because they almost never directly know the amount of fuel used to move their stuff effectively. The emission from outsourced services, that's what's classed as scope 3. And this is where we distinguish between that fuel-based calculation by the carrier from an activity-based calculation by the customer. As the name suggests, the activity-based calculation depends on knowledge of the transport activity, measured in ton kilometers, that you contract your transport provider to move for you, and then matching that with an appropriate emission intensity value. The emission intensity could be provided by the transport company if they're mature in their calculations, but you may have to resort to a modelling approach by a calculation tool, and we'll hear from Andrea at GreenRouter about the sort of processes that would follow. As a last resort, you may have to result to default values and the best available default values for different types of transport. We do try to discourage that sort of calculation because...
Alan.
Pardon?
No, sorry, I think I had a connection problem. Sorry for that.
Okay. So defaults we discourage, but we do provide them, and that's one of the modules in the back of the Glec framework, so that they are there to help people when they start out on their journey of calculation. I've mentioned a little bit about checking the information, assurance or accreditation. We provide two forms where we will check calculations. The first is the accreditation of calculation tools and programs. They can be accredited for their ability to calculate emissions in conformance with the Glec framework, and that largely takes into account the way that the methodology works and the way that the emissions are reported. So are they following those two aspects of what we set out in the Glec framework? And the second is then validation of company calculations. And that's where we bring in the other all-important aspect, which is actually the input data for a company's calculation. That calculation may be done by the company itself, by an in-house tool, or by the use of one of the tools such as GreenRouter that are out there on the market and which have been accredited against the Glec framework. The data that's available, primary data would be the carrier data, what we would encourage. But then, as I say, there are various other less ideal ways that you could have data input as a starting point. The other thing that I've touched on is then the reporting that we expect of the emissions results. That we have something called the Glec declaration, which is again set out in the framework as a standardized way to report the relevant information against a menu of different KPIs. And there are two real purposes for this. One is to facilitate business to business reporting, to make sure that there is a common way of transferring information so that carriers aren't asked for information against a different specification by their different customers, and similarly to help that process along so that logistics service providers who would be sat in the middle actually have got a common flow of information through the chain. And the second purpose is public reporting, so facilitating that reporting out in company reports or into CDP and programs like that. And that also aligns back to the earlier slide about the importance of the challenge against the logistics sector, because the specification for those reports also matches up with what's being used by ITF, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and CDP, etc. This is just an example of a public reporting template. What we would like to see in terms of the types of indicators that are included, but also the breakdown, not just a total for an organisation, but also understanding what the emissions are broken out by different main mode across the supply chain, together with the activity, because you can pick out not only the intensity of the different modes and compare them, but you can also then begin to understand, as an organisation changes the modes that it uses year on year as part of its decarbonisation strategy, how that's feeding through in terms of both the impact of the modal shift and the change within each mode's efficiency year on year. And those data are based on an organisation's actual emissions and sort of the typical breakdown, but we have tweaked one or two numbers just so that they couldn't be identified. And just to finish off, just to give a feel for sort of the more detailed training that we run, we have both e-learning courses and some virtual courses that were developed just prior to the pandemic, which stood us in good store through COVID, and they're running across not only Glec frameworks, so the calculation and reporting side of things, but also introductions to sustainable logistics, formation of sustainable logistics roadmaps, and how these come together into a bigger picture. And there's a lot of information available if anyone's interested in more in-depth discussions on this. So that's it. Hopefully I haven't run on too long. The temptation is there, and I'll pass back to Jeanette.
Thank you very much for the information, Alan, and all details are very much appreciated. So just before continuing with Andreas' talk, there are a couple of questions that maybe you could just clarify them. Could you please repeat what is the ISO standard being developed?
Yeah, so the ISO, it's called ISO 14083, and it's basically designed for the calculation and reporting of greenhouse gas emissions for transport chains, both freight and passenger. So it picks up the concepts of the Glec framework, basically puts them into the format of an ISO standard, but alongside the same for passenger, a bit somewhat more integrated together. Although the content is based on the same principles, the presentation is very different. That framework, we try to be user friendly, with the best will in the world. I'm the project manager for that ISO. The nature of the process and the requirement is it's not particularly, I think, going to be a user-friendly presentation, but it is useful in terms of being that bit more prescriptive in terms of the way that calculations should be performed.
Perfect, thank you. One more question. How would you calculate ton kilometer or other activity factor for logistics sites?
So you wouldn't do a ton kilometre. You would normally do a ton, or possibly a per item figure, depending on the nature of it, and then you would include that within the calculation of an intensity for the whole chain. So you're effectively adding additional greenhouse gas emissions in for the handling, and then divided that by the ton kilometers for all the various legs across the whole chain.
Thank you. And then just as a follow-up on the ton kilometer question is a comment here, excuse me. In particular, given weight data is typically of poor quality in road transport. So that is more as a comment or than a question, but I don't know if you have anything that you wish to add to that.
I think, to be honest, I think data is very much one of the challenges, not just weight data, but just but data in general is probably a greater challenge than anything else these days, as we've been able to mature the calculation methodology over the last few years. And I mean, that's why we're working with partners such as Transporeon and others in our data projects to try to capture more data of all sorts and improve the calculations.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alan. So I'm going to pass the word on to Andrea Fossa. That's the CEO of GreenRouter that Alan has also referred to during his presentation. So Andrea will be going into more details about the use of the Glec framework in order to help their clients in reporting emission reduction. So Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly well.
Can you see the screen?
Oh, so perfect.
Very good. So thank you, first of all, Janet, for the invitation. Of course, as always, Alan's presentation are, as I say, crystal clear. So I encourage you to read the Glec framework, which is, let's say, a bit long, but very, very effective when you read it. We'll see in a minute what, as a calculation tool and say platform for decarbonization in transport, we are working on. And of course, the effect of having Glec framework behind is very powerful. And as Alan was saying, we need to sometimes jump on what is missing in data terms, and so try to model, to use the fault value and so on. And this is very useful because at least it improves comparability and gives you a, say, scientifically based input. So we'll see this in a minute. Now, the agenda today is quite simple. So we few words about GreenRouter, then we talk about calculation quality and what we have as an experience, and of course what you can do also on the scenario and so on that we envision in our platform, but I think is more and more relevant for the decarbonization journey, as it was calling Alan before. Now, who we are. Basically, we are a 6-year-old company, so very old in the decarbonization of transport, I don't know, with 3 founders and about 15 people and this number of customers. The important part is that we are starting to calculate massively tons of CO2 in both transport, but also we cover company side, logistics side. And as Alan was really well explaining, of course, many of this information are from different sources and from different even system in the same companies. Of course, it's really different also the perspective. So it could be the shipper, which could be a retailer, a manufacturer, whoever, but it could be also a carrier or a logistic player. And typically freight forward logistic player are sometimes both shippers because they don't have all the, let's say, the trucks or the ships or the players that they use, or on the other hand, they could be also first users. So to understand all this complexity, it's important. And why I say this? Because the journey that companies need to travel is basically calculation is the basis, and you need to have a sort of complete asset in your company. But Alan was saying very good, it's important to look into the reporting. We normally work on different aspects. For sure, the data quality, for sure, the calculation, we'll see in a minute our, let's say, compliance with Glec. But it's also important that you think from the very start how to use those data internally and of course for the external reporting. And when I mean internally means segmenting the results. And this is something that we have been more and more using over time. Why? Also because not only because you want to know, your customers, different level of GHG impact, or they might ask you, some more and more customers asking their suppliers to provide this data, but also because we're working on targets and actions. And of course, the climate action is the final result. So this journey is complex and we need sound calculation. Now, why Glec is so important? I looked into my experience, 6 years experience in this field is, I don't think is the oldest one, but it's complex to say that is just easy. We know that claim framework is scientifically sound. This is very important. It's influential. You see the number of sponsored partners and also the companies adopting. It's global. That's very crucial point because it put together many different, let's say, previously good systems or tools or methodologies, but they put them all together, and that's very, very relevant. And they put them all together in all modes of transport. So this, to me, is a big differentiating approach. And you see in the statement, when you get accredited, basically you get a statement like this, which I can show you very briefly. So of course you mentioned GHG protocol and so on, but you also mentioned the kind of data you can manage. So default, which Alan was correctly saying is the basis, and we'll see in a minute something more about this, model or carrier or aggregated. But the most important that you can show that it covers everything at global level. And this is from a, let's say, reliability point of view for customers is very relevant. So saying that there is a protocol which is global, which is approved by many companies working in the business or simply being customer of transportation is really key. On the other hand, now, what are the extra values that we see as GreenRouter in the Glec framework? First of all is, of course, the quality of calculation. And I don't want to talk about direct data from the field that Transporeon will do in a minute, and it will be a very nice example doing it. But the point is comparability, as I said. So we need to be good in calculation because we want qualitative, high quality results. And the other point that we want also to understand, and this is of course as a projection, what could be the differential of action A versus B, of scenario A versus B, and so on. And this is important even if it's default, because with Glec framework you might have this data, this information, this parameter available for your, let's say, planning and for your decarbonization journey. Okay, so let's talk about the first thing. Alan was already mentioning what should be in a report. This is a very simple example, a demo of what you can have. Of course, there is a period, the number of deliveries and whatever, full truckload or less than truckload. Okay, slightly different methodology, but the point is you have to in some way to map your flows and you have to report values, and well-to-wheels and tank-to-wheels are still very relevant. The key part is that you have to get to this point, you need a lot of information. So I just quickly showing all the pieces that you have to put together. Sorry, I just move, Jeanette, don't get offended this, because the point is we want to have many information coming through. The best way is not simply to get simple data from the systems, because unfortunately the system don't have all this data. ERPs have been board to manage accounting, to manage operational activities, but they are slowly adapting to store and manage what I call environmental information. And of course, many of these are not novelties because, I mean, you feel freight weight or freight modality, load factor, but you have to put them together in a complex way. So the point is, when you don't have all these things, it happens, and this is another part of our report, that you have to declare what you're doing. And you can see here, I can get energy emission consumption, just one example, could be specific, could be calculated, could be default or not considered. So in this case, it's all default, but we have a source which is very valuable. And this source is also important because you can declare, this is the case, the less than truckload. What we do normally in our report, we say the source is Glec framework, we have the load factors declared, and we can give a good reference. So this is very powerful. Our customers think about 50-50 shippers and the rest is carriers or LSP or freight forwarders. They need to have relevant references they need to be sure that what they communicate or they way either to customers or externally is solid. And this is a very good part. So to me, this is a crucial part, to have a good quality and to be able to use default which are reliable and sound. Now, what is the hierarchy for quality? I was talking, of course, default data, detailed modeling, meaning that you can model the flows. If you have a TMS, transport management system, that's easier. If you don't have, that could take a while, but it's important. Of course, primary data. And primary data, especially for point-to-point, is very important. For less than truckload could be a good, let's say, starting point to get to a good value, because of course you have to compare it to the value, to volume you are actually delivering in the network. But the three levels that are stated in the Glec framework are still very important because they make users understand that there could be different quality levels. And just to show, this is a complex picture, but we focus on just in the middle one. What I mean by modeling. Modeling, I mean that we can work through the steps of the flows. Of course, you can see here a big truck, maybe a massive flow, point to point to a TP, and then a delivery, a secondary distribution truck, which is, of course, can have one to many deliveries. By modeling this, you get actually a finer way to understand what is the impact. The typical question we are asked when we see global companies that, do you have an idea what could be last mile electric vehicle effect? And we smile because we know that by modeling, you know that this is just last mile. So if you work on, 10,000 kilometers away or whatever by plane, I mean, last mile electric is nice, but it's not very effective in terms of total decarbonization. Still is very good for cities. The point is to have a good view of the whole supply chain. So modeling is very strong. And that's why on the right-hand side, you see here decision-making accuracy. And it's also very important for the second step, because once you know where your flows are, where the big parts are, what you can do, and this is a screenshot of our carbon budgeting model, you start to have a sort of trend, which is what you forecast in the future. You start to have targets. You know where is your supply chain. So this is just a picture saying, okay, my total CO2 is divided into segment A, B, C, D, whatever. I can select one of those nodes or some simple part, and then use a selection of action. So this could be then become a sort of, target effect. But if you have good quality, you can reach this level. And final event is that, of course, you can also plan in your company year by year, month by month, whatever, actions that you know in advance which will be the effect. And that's why I said also for default values, Glec is very important, because when you do this kind of simulation, many times you need to have these kind of default values which are reliable. They are not perfect, of course. They are averages, but they are good averages. Okay, this is the message. And now what is the end results? And with this, I'm done. Basically, you can build something like this. You have whatever your network. Okay, this is just a demo picture of a global network by air, typically. Then you have year one, and this year one can be slowly managed in terms of the reduction with many simple actions or complex action, because network redesign is a very complex and powerful action. But on the other hand, moving your warehouse, concentrating or decentralizing, combined effect could be many different, like biofuels and the rail and whatever. You have a plan. And this is very relevant because when companies start to declare targets, Alan was before mentioning science-based targets, you need to deliver on this, and you need to have also good simulation and, let's say, future data, future results to be, let's say, reasonable, okay? And year over year, you will monitor, you will improve, you will work on that, but you can also communicate solid data. One of the most recent trends is how can we be sure that the reduction targets are really, the reduction of CO2 are really made? Well, if you have a good modeling and good information from the field, from the system, and detailed calculation, then you can also show and demonstrate that you are a reliable reduction over time, because this means having a clear basis for calculation and reporting. So I don't know if I was too short or too long, but I'm done, Jeanette.
Oh, absolutely perfect. So thank you very much, Andrea. For all of the attendees, I remind you that you have the option of writing in the chat directly the questions that may come up during this webinar. And in the meantime, I'm going to pass on the word to Ross Mathieson from Baillie Gifford, who will be giving it a talk about the investor's perspective. So Ross, your turn. Oh, you're sharing already. Perfect. Just need to unmute. We cannot hear you. Yeah.
Hi there, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ross Matheson. I am a fund manager at Baillie Gifford. For my presentation today, what I wanted to do was to give you an investor's perspective on how we incorporate sustainability topics, particularly that of climate change. Firstly, to introduce Baillie Gifford, we are an Edinburgh-based investment manager. We manage around £250 billion worth of assets on behalf of our clients. We're mainly investing in publicly listed companies, so companies whose shares you can buy on the stock exchange, but we do also have a growing pool of investments in private companies. And we are managing on behalf of pension clients, people's private savings, charities. In terms of Baillie Gifford and what makes us stand out compared to some of our peers would be, first of all, we are very much an active fund manager, so there are no limitations on where we'll invest if it meets our climate strategies. So, for example, in the strategy that I'm responsible for, global income growth, we are needing to find 60 companies out of a universe that we think is around 5,300. Secondly, growth. We are very much a believer in growth fundamentals. Growth in companies' fundamentals is the best way to add value. And then lastly, we are truly long-term. So we say we're long-term, and you can see by our average holding period, which on my team is over 7 years, that we truly are long-term. And that's at a time when, as you can see on the chart on the right, the average holding period for the market continues to come down and down. And I think sustainability, when you're trying to incorporate such a large topic into your thinking, it truly does need you to be long-term. I think there can be misalignment if you're too short-term focused, as when you are doing sustainability properly, a big part of that is engagement. And with engagement, quite often you're asking companies to make investments that will benefit their wider stakeholders for the very long term, but maybe will harm financials in the near term. And so being long-term, I think you can do that far more authentically. So this chart here just shows a graph that I'm sure you'll all be familiar with, seen various versions of this, showing the spread between the climate promise that we have made, or where we think we need to get, and the current reality. And in spite of considerable efforts to date, there is a huge gap between where the world's companies are and where we must get to by 2050 and in advance of 2050. And there must be alignment between investors and the companies that we invest in to close the gaps between the reality and the requirements. And we think that we as investors have got a big role to play in encouraging our companies to be ambitious. So these two charts here give some illustration of the momentum that's building within the corporate sector and by investors. The slide on the left takes data at the end of 2021 and shows the acceleration of companies with verified science-based targets. The number has continued to accelerate in 2022, so we're seeing far more of the corporates appreciating the importance of setting these science-based targets. And then similarly, we've seen a rapid adoption of sustainable investment frameworks by institutional investors. So Baillie Gifford is one of 236 signatories to an investor coalition pledging to have our clients' portfolios at net zero by 2050 or sooner. And within the very first year of that initiative launching, there were nearly $60 trillion of assets signed up to the pledge. So what does this all mean? It means that investors and companies are tied to the common goal of net zero, and now we have to figure out how to get there. And within my team, we have set a target for our strategy that by 2030, more than 90% of our climate material holdings will have set science-based targets which are aligned with a 1.5 degree scenario. And of course, setting the goal is only one thing, but the real challenge comes in the delivery of these promises. So when we're looking for long-term growth, we have found over the years there have been many multi-decade interesting thematic drivers which we can focus on, a few of which we've highlighted here. So gene sequencing costs, for example, with them falling so dramatically, it's opened up many opportunities for personalised medicine, and Baillie Gifford are big investors in one of the gene sequencing companies called Illumina. Then machine intelligence, the use of data creates new business models, but also provides opportunity for existing businesses, companies that previously have maybe been managing the business in a way that they don't have access to all their data in a kind of easy manipulative way, but they now can get hold of that data and make better business decisions. And then climate change is a really important thematic driver that we think is now getting the respect that it deserves. And initially the focus is very much predominantly on risks, but we also believe there are many opportunities for businesses to position themselves as solutions providers. And we see that both in some obvious companies that are perhaps running wind farms, for example, but there are others where a company like we own, a Swedish company called Atlas Copco, where a key reason for people buying their compressor products is energy efficiency. So companies that get on the right side of climate change can see business opportunities coming up. Next, I'll describe the investment challenges. We're supposed to have a slide here. Just quickly going through some investment challenges related to investing, and alignment with corporates is something that we need to get right. So we're fully aware that often investors are not always speaking with one voice. So we have inconsistent priorities. At the same time, investors are only one of many stakeholders which companies seek to satisfy. So we understand for corporates how challenging this can be when you've got many investors talking. So we think engagement's an important part of our process, but one we need to be very, very thoughtful about. So now on to how we assess a company's goals when we're looking to invest. With many sustainability goals being set, we wanted to come up with some guardrails to judge these goals and whether we think these are high quality goals. And this chart, we have a chart where we walk through the framework to assess the quality of a company's goals. So we definitely want goals to be measurable. We want them to be quantified, not just narrative, and we want to focus on what really matters for a business. And then this here shows our assessment framework that we as a team have developed. And before we will invest £1 for any client, we do sustainability analysis through our own framework that we call impact, ambition, and trust. So within sustainability work, there's already a lot of aggregating in the analysis, and we feel therefore it's important to break out the impact a company is having between the impact of its product and the impact of its operations, which can be dramatically different. And then we assess this impact of an organisation to how ambitious are they to address the impact, and then we'll look into the leadership team and the governance structures to see whether or not we should trust them. So we will take on companies that do have a big material impact, provided we see sufficient ambition to improve that impact and we trust the management team to deliver on that impact. So the interaction between the impact and the ambition and trust is very, very important for us. So this chart here just shows the sustainability goals that I was mentioning, the decision tree that we go down. So first of all, is it a measurable goal? Too often we're finding examples of companies will give us a good narrative, but it's a goal that we find hard to measure because it's not been quantified. We then want it to be group wide. Quite often when you read the details of a company's goals, it maybe applies to only non-franchised operations or only one part of the world. We want it to be holistic. We need the company to have goals which are material. Quite often you can get a company that gives goals that are 20 or 30 different goals. What we want is to be slightly more concentrated on the topics that are really, really important, because we think focus is really clear. And then consistent. Too often we've seen companies change goals from year to year, so you can't actually track progress in a very clear way. So we really appreciate when companies are consistent with the setting of their goals. And then engagement, last slide. This is something that's a huge part of what we do. We believe as a supportive long-term shareholder, we can add value to our businesses through successful engagement. And quite often that comes in the form of giving companies the confidence to invest over the long term. And sometimes it's a case of sharing best practices with our companies, that we've seen what works really well in one region or in one business type, and sharing that with companies. And our engagement is both reactive. Sometimes there'll be situations which arrive where we just need to get a bit closer to the company for a period of time as they work through certain issues. But then we try to make it proactive as well, and take topics like climate change, like packaging, and engage with a group of companies to try and work out what best in class looks like, what our companies need to do to get to best in class, and give them, again, like I said before, positive feedback to be ambitious, but also pass on any comments we have as to what we think best in class looks like. And so, yeah, that takes us through the brief presentation of an investor's perspective and sustainability topics. And if you do have any questions or any thoughts, then please do share them with us. There's my email address here, and I'd be interested to hear from anyone who wants to get in touch.
Yes, I do in fact have here 2 questions. And first of all, thank you very much, Ross, for your presentation. So I'm going to go with the last one first, actually, because I believe the other one might actually be more addressed to Andrea. So at the last issue was in 2019. When can we expect a new issue version of the Glec framework? So Alan, that would be a question for you, I would say.
Actually, we've been continually updating. So the last version was uploaded about a month ago, because we do annual review of the data input for some of the defaults. So we would yeah, the last issue was May 2022, and we're really focused primarily on supporting the ISO development now. And when the ISO is finalized, and probably before it's published, we're working behind the scenes on what needs to change within that, and probably look to produce a version 3 of the Glec framework in and around the same time. But I don't exactly know when that will be. Around the end of this year, maybe, something like that.
Okay, perfect. And another question, do you have different categories of containers based on their tier weight? Andrea, could that maybe be a question for you?
For
because
sure, the Glec framework has got a difference among 20-40 feet. Okay, this is for sure included. I'm not sure there is a difference in the tear of the single container. It's a very detailed aspect. So I'm thinking, how could we work on this? For sure, the total weight. I mean, the point is, if you look into factors, normally they take into account the total mass you're moving. So that's why it's different among different kind of trucks, small, large, and so on. And so you add the gross weight to the tear, and you sum up to a total mass, which, I mean, has energy consumption, and depending on the mix of energy, you derive the CO2 emissions. Okay, this is the logic. Then, of course, it's so complex to say. So temperature could be an issue. It could be the volume. I mean, many things. So at the moment, it's like this. There could be an improvement because, as Alan was saying, that they are improving all the time. But wow, if it is about the single tear, I don't think there is a differentiation at the moment, apart from 2040 of the swap body. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's probably a subtlety to take into account as well, in that it's the gross weight that determines the fuel consumption. But once you've calculated the fuel consumption, you would normally then allocate the emissions back to the net weight of the goods within the container, because the container is what's called transport packaging, and is really there only for the utility of the carrier, which complicates matters slightly.
And just to be more precise, Alan, sorry, because in the chat I wrote gross weight. Yes, to me, gross weight is net weight of goods plus secondary packaging plus pallets and so on. This to me is gross weight of goods. Then it comes the tear of the system you're using, like container or truck or whatever. Okay, so just to be clear, because otherwise then the answer is different.
Yeah, correct.
Perfect. So one more question. This one would be for you, Ross. Is Baillie Gifford's perspective the norm amongst investors today? If not, when will it be so?
Yeah, so I think you have seen the industry has woken up to the issue at hand and is starting to take this far more seriously. You can see that by the number of assets that have signed up to the Net Zero Asset Management Initiative. So I think the industry is coming round and understanding the kind of severity of the problem at hand. I think there will still be some, shall we say, more traditional investors who kind of think this is something that perhaps is on the fringes, but I think most people realise this is mainstream now, which is positive. And then I think it's just people have got different ways of approaching this topic, and people take it either more seriously or less seriously. And what we're finding is long-term investors, we have got an incentive to get these topics right, because if you're owning a company for 10 years and they mismanage a sustainability topic such as the approach to climate change, it feels very likely over your 10-year horizon, if that is mismanaged, that is going to come back and bite you. So we need to get this right. But also with Baillie Gifford being set up as a partnership, it allows us as well to do other interesting things and be long-term in our approach to investing, whether that's the number of resources. So on my investment desk, I run the fund in a team of 9 of us. One of those is an environmental, social and governance analyst. That's his full-time job. So he spends all his time analysing these issues and engaging with our companies. And he's from a pool within Baillie Gifford of around 40 ESG analysts. So there's serious resource put behind this topic because of how serious that we take it. But then we also have lots of different partnerships, like the partnership we have with Alan in the Smart Freight Centre, where we're prepared to support these NGOs that we see doing fantastic work. And often with those partnerships, you're not exactly sure what's going to come out of it. But if you see someone who is really kind of moving the industry forward, like what Alan and the team are, then we're happy to get behind them. So I think most people in the industry are now on board, see the severity of the situation, but the ability to act is quite different based on different processes and time horizons and kind of ownership structures.
Thank you, Ross, for that clarification. So there's just a comment here where it says it's very easy to be done as we take into account the type of engine. We can take into account the tier weight too. Imagine how difference can make 1 ton less tier weight. We're at your disposal to support you on this. Thank you very much. So now we're going to pass on the word to Lucas Kramer, who's the Sustainability Innovation Lead at Transporeon. So he's going to showcase us how data quality has helped transport emissions, and specifically in the cases for IKEA and Geoteca.
Thank you very much, Janet. And thanks for the introduction. Happy to be here today and present about a very recent best practice example that we have conducted together with our customers IKEA and Geoteca on the impact of data quality on emission management. And first of all, I would like to share a little bit about ourselves, about who Transporeon is and what we do in our core. And then talking about the tool, carbon visibility, and the actual case study that we have conducted. Transporeon as the company is now existing since more than 22 years. And before losing too many words about us, I will come back to that later in the presentation. I want to start off with a quote of one of the most famous and accredited thought leaders in regards of decarbonization, Al Gore, that the sustainability revolution is the single biggest business opportunity in the history of the world. It has the scale of the industrial revolution coupled with the speed of the digital revolution. And we really see this picking up speed throughout the last 12 months in our customer base. So on our platform, we have around 1,200 industrial shipper companies. And on the other hand side, on the offer side of the market, we have around 120,000 carriers. And the interest is picking up rapidly. and therefore we have decided it's time to act, and not just us. So we're having a lot of legislative support recently here in the European Union. We have the European Green Deal, which brought this topic to top priority. The CSRD is about to be established from next year on, so things are moving in the right direction. Emission reporting will become mandatory. And we have the Fit for 55 initiative, where we need to apply the carbon certificate trading as of 2026 into our industry. So the compelling event is there. Acting now is crucial, as we could have seen in this beautiful graph from Ross, that we are very far away from our actual promises. So we have decided as a company together to serve our customer base, to lead the way towards more sustainable logistics operations. And what is it that we actually do? So we are not a classical TMS. So we have actually developed our network from the other way around. So Gartner has very well defined actually our value proposition in one phrase. And we are actually have built the network of shippers and carriers first. And on top of this streamlined communication in this protected and closed network, we have on top built several software applications. And these applications are from transport execution applications to dock and yard management, market intelligence, so strategic and operational software applications. And now our recent application is called Carbon Visibility. And what is it actually that we do in Carbon Visibility? So as Alan has shared, we have this three scopes in emission management. We have the direct emissions in scope 1, the indirect in scope 2, and the value chain emission in scope 3, which we have looked into in detail within this case study, since GTK is one of the main supplier for transportation for IKEA. But the problem is that IKEA has a lack of data to manage those emissions. So this is a challenge we faced, and we matched here in this case then the scope 1 emissions of GTK with the transports of IKEA, and the result which I'm going to present you in a minute, are showcasing the differences between the three data models that the Glec framework is actually offering. And how did we compare those three data models? So as Alan and Andrea have presented earlier, we have in the Glec framework 3 different models of measuring emissions. And I think a very strong message that already came out today is we need full coverage of emission values of transport logistics. And to get this full coverage, we have the default data-driven calculations, and they are very good to get an entire picture. But then the next steps are to get together in collaboration with the shipper and the transport companies on the journey to improve the data quality through the time by firstly modeling the data, so adding more real data points to each transport, like for example the actual route, the region, the road profile, the weight is a very critical information as well, the vehicle type, and then in the best case scenario, drive the data input to primary data values like the actually driven and consumed fuel. And this is the journey that we are enabling our customer base to do with our platform and our tool. So to actually start with enabling full coverage of the network with default values, and then by adding more primary and model data sources, growing into the most accurate emission data that you can get for transport, because at the end of the day, you can't manage what you can't measure. And to really go into actionable decarbonization, the accuracy of the data is critical. And this is where our differentiation is the real-time visibility network that we are offering. So we have several visibility partners connected to our platform that provide us with additional data. So we are pretty much sitting between the TMS and the telematic system of the carrier. So the TMS of the shipper and telematic system of the carrier, and can then match the data points to the best level of accuracy, and therefore provide the most accurate emission values. And now to get to the case study, I will leave this screen for a couple of seconds so that you have the chance to scan the QR code and directly download the case study. It's access free, and all what I'm going to share now is presented and described in more detail, even in this case study. So to come to the details of the case study design and the key findings that we have identified, we have, first of all, we have compared all three data models, all three calculation models from the Glec framework on the same transports. So we have calculated each transports with three different models to really compare what is actually the deviation between the different models, and to what extent is this actually really making a difference or not. So we have the participants IKEA Supply Chain Operations and GTK, and we used the Transporeon Carbon Visibility tool. And the number within this case study of transport that we have analyzed, 1,720 full truck loads that GTK has executed for IKEA. And we have used the default-driven calculation, the modeled, and the primary data calculation on fuel basis. And the key findings were that we have a deviation of, on average, up to 5% between wheel-to-wheel emissions, based on calculations for transport above 900 kilometers. So more, even longer transports, we have identified an even higher deviation of 6% between the default and the primary values. And for heavy transports, 11%, and the strongest deviation we found for multimodal transports, so road, rail, road, with up to 27% deviation. And in most of the cases, we could clearly say that the better the data quality, the lower the carbon footprint. This is, I think, due to the very beautiful design of the Glec framework itself, that it does incentivize primary data or higher data quality. So it's really hard to calculate yourself more positively, and actually is avoiding greenwashing from the framework itself. And what we could show here as well is one of the core messages is actually that the crucial part on this journey to develop from default calculations into primary data is collaboration. And collaboration between the shipper and the executing carrier. And why should a carrier do this is the question that we have actually faced the most in the last months. And what we could show here is that it has truly and very significant benefits on both sides. So for IKEA, I think it's pretty clear that the lower the footprint they need to report, the better for the numbers and the better for the CSRD report they need to publish next year. But for the carrier, for GTK in this case, they could present themselves as a very, very well-performing, sustainable carrier. And they have, we have actually been able to increase the primary data share up to almost 90% of all these 1,720 transports. And GTK has therewith positioned themselves in a very good position for future business. And I have to say as well that GTK is really driving the market here. They have very well driver trainings. They have a very high quality fleet, which are usually not older than 2 years. So they're really taking this serious, and GTK is at the end of the day getting probably the most benefit out of this. So what is really beautiful here is that the collaboration at the end of the day makes this whole possible, and GTK is putting themselves in the pole position for securing future business with customers, like, for example, IKEA. And I have as well brought some transport samples. They are as well showed in the case study itself. So when we have here 3 different transport samples with 3 different distances, all above 900 kilometers, and we could see significant deviations in the fuel consumption, and as well, therefore as well in the wheel to tank emission overall. In case you're interested in more information about that, yeah, I highly recommend and emphasize to download the case study, but as well reach out to me directly or to one of our team members to get more information on this. To come to an end, since the time's limited and we still have one more speaker, I want to quickly show the feedback that we got from our participants. Since Johan is a big fan of this case study, and we are further already evolving new projects in this regards together with the Smart Freight Center and the Data Access Project to provide to the market and to actually invite more companies to clear the way for more collaboration and unleash the data that is currently still hidden by each participant, which would help us tremendously to drive the entire decarbonization of the industry forward. And as well, Martin Sarapinas, the Chief Information Officer of Getica, has as well shown full support. And one of the core, I think, one of the authors of the Glec framework, Alan McKinnon, has as well confirmed that the journey, the future to actually make data actionable and drive the decarbonization is the development from default to modeled into primary data whenever possible. This won't be possible for the entire supply chain, that's for sure, but the more accurate we get, the more meaningful actions for decarbonization we can take in the future. And this is the promise that we give with carbon visibility and with our innovations that are as well about to follow. We enable you to manage your logistics emission in the most accurate and efficient way across the entire supply chain, and do this in 4 steps by measuring first, depending on the data availability in 3 different types, growing you into the most accurate primary data calculations. Then with the power of our network that we have, with roughly 15% of the European freight under our management within the network, we can immediately show you where you perform good and where you don't. So we already have benchmarks and relevant market benchmarks in place that you can compare your own performance with. And based on that, you can decarbonize operationally by intermodal optimization, for example, by more biofuel usage, or you can as well strategically decarbonize with transport network optimization by green procurement. And at the end of the day as well, communication is a big part to further drive the entire decarbonization of the industry. This is a small sneak preview of the tool itself. We are currently in the beta version of the tool, and we're going to go live with the final version next month. But I would as well like to offer exclusively to all participants of this webinar to get free access to carbon visibility, to the beta version, to test it, because at the moment we are looking for every feedback available out of the market to further improve our tool, to prioritize our next development steps. So in case you would like to get access, upload some transports. This could be done already with an Excel file, no integration needed, and learn and do the first steps. Then you're happy to reach out for more information and get access to the tool. And this is it for me, Janet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you. I just want to get the attention to everybody that I actually put the code that you can scan in order to get the case study. I put it here in the chat of the meeting, so you can go in there and scan it in case you didn't have time to do it during Lucas's presentation earlier. So going for the last speaker, last but not least, Maria Coutuvet, who's a sustainability expert at Einride, and she will be talking about maximizing emission savings through digitalization. So Maria, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just trying to share my screen. That's of course not as easy as always.
Don't worry about it.
Okay, just a little second. Okay. Can you see the slides?
Yes, maybe you could just put it in presenter mode so we can see it better. Yes, perfect. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. So great. That's working. All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me and inviting Einride to this event. It was really interesting to listen to all of the presentation. So my name is Maria, and today I'm representing Einride as their sustainability expert. And I will guide you through our technology, so through what we're doing and how we maximize our emission savings with our electrical and automated freight solutions. So first of all, for those who are not familiar with Einride, we are the Stockholm-based company providing an intelligent freight service. We were founded in 2016, and we have been actively operating on the market for over 2 years now. We were the first company in the world to put an autonomous electrical truck on a public road. And now we work on the European market with the customers such as Lidl and Oatly, with whom we managed to save more than 420 tons of CO2 together. And we're also starting right now our operation on the US market with customers like Bridgestone and Maersk. So sustainability always was in the center of everything that we do in Einride, since we firmly believe that the best days of the mankind are in the future and we just need to create it. Having the common generation in mind, we seek to always make conscious and smart decisions, big and small. We are continuously reviewing cutting-edge science and research and adapt our business and our product accordingly. At Einride, we aim to inspire people and to take responsibility for the planet and for each other. Together with the partners and customers, we can influence society in a positive direction. These core beliefs form company vision as to make Earth a better place through the intelligent movement. So what is intelligent movement? We believe in digitalization. In other words, we are taking the transportation network entirely online. Digitalization helps us to do things faster, to do things better, and to do things cheaper. Through digitalization, we are able to deliver better experience and build sustainable relationship for our customers. In order to achieve digitalization, we developed Saga, a platform, our central brain that orchestrates and optimizes operation and help us to run electric freight at highest efficiency and to maximize performance both on vehicle and on fleet level. We also believe in automation. Autonomous technology makes fleet both smarter and safer. And using a combination of the hardware such as sensors, cameras, and radars, and software, Einride's technology can help reduce traffic-related deaths significantly and improve performance. Clearly, we believe in electrification as well. In the evolution of the autonomous transport, the fleet needs to be electrified. This step is crucial for any autonomous company as it will ensure that the future of transport will be sustainable. All vehicles, both autonomous and the driver-operated at the Einride network, are electric. We believe that electricity will always be a better alternative than diesel. With electrification of vehicle, we can reduce CO2 emissions by up to 95% in the countries with a low carbon electricity mix. We also can reduce NOx emission and ultrafine soot particles that can be harmful for people's health. Moreover, electrification alone translates to a 15% reduction in transport costs when your network is fully electrified. But we do not rely completely on advantageous electricity mix. We also improve our environmental performance by conducting state-of-the-art energy simulation for our fleet. This allows us, for example, to find an appropriate size of the battery for our vehicle, which leads to decreased embodied emissions. Also, we perform a schedule modeling, which allows us to increase daily driving time, which also leads to the lower embodied emission per kilometer and decrease the amount of the empty trips. Finally, all those optimizations are quantified in our in-house cost and emission model, so our customers can forecast the environmental performance for different vehicle combination and operation modes. As I already mentioned, in Einride, we approach fleet performance not only from the operational side, but also we inform our client about the embodied emissions of the vehicle. We were not able to find currently existing methodology on the market that will account for both of the emission sources, and that is why we developed our own simulation approach that takes into account the full life cycle of the transportation solution. To calculate the operational emissions of the electrical trucks energy consumption is simulated with Einride in-house vehicle models. And these models are sensitive to the operating conditions such as vehicle specification, load, speed profiles, road geometric properties, and other physics-based parameters. Using this energy consumption, emissions are calculated from electricity emission factor for the specific operation region based on International Energy Agency data. Furthermore, we also developed several scenarios that will project how these emissions will change in this specific region in 2025 and 2030. The benchmark for diesel trucks fuel consumption rate is evaluated based on the average provided by Swedish Transportation Administration statistic and translated into operational CO2 emissions by fuel emissions data given by the United States Energy Information Administration. Our hypothesis for the embodied emission calculation is based both on the production data provided by the vehicle manufacturers and emission factors mentioned in the scientific literature. For the vehicle body, we use emission data available in the grid model, while the battery estimation, we use the latest scientific papers. And we constantly review new scientific development and update those data when needed. Finally, our models also provide the possibility to create several scenarios for the battery manufacturing, depending on the location of the producer. We see our environmental advantages to be in the same area as our cost advantages. First of all, it's energy use. Electrification gives us the possibility not only to avoid combustion of fossils, but also allows us to boost the usage of renewable electricity. We are able to increase daily usage of vehicles, especially with the introduction of automated vehicles. Also, due to our energy modeling and state-of-the-art charging infrastructure, we're able to increase the lifespan of our batteries up to 5 times, which also draws embodied emissions down. Finally, electrical vehicles have less parts in their motors, so that's how we have managed to reduce our embodied emissions due to decreased maintenance. According to the estimations, Einride solution has potential of reducing up to 95% of life cycle emissions of freight in the countries with a low carbon energy mix. It is also important to mention that electrical vehicles, unlike diesel, can improve their environmental performance with time, since more and more countries are shifting nowadays towards sustainable electricity generation technologies. But even currently, we see environmental benefit of freight electrification in 81% of European countries, in 75% of United States, and in 75% of all the countries globally. And even if the emission reduction patterns is not distributed equally around the globe, we project them to rise substantially in the next decade. According to the current prediction, by 2030, due to the greener electricity mix, we would be able to achieve 60% of CO2 reduction potential from the electrification globally. At Einride, we believe that the future of freight is electrical. We believe that current technology is able to show massive environmental benefit and is ready for the large-scale global implementation. We also believe in always pushing ourselves beyond best practices. That is why we trace our emissions of our solutions beyond the operational phase and improve our performance by implementing data analysis-based optimization. Finally, we believe that only by joining forces with other people in the industry can we achieve the necessary paradigm shift that will ensure the further development of sustainable logistics. So this is and for me. So if you have any questions, you can mail me. My email is indicated here.
We cannot actually see the email. Oh, it's down below. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe we can just copy it also into the chat, so
Sure.
we have it. So I don't know if anybody else have any further questions for today. In any case, I wish to thank all of the speakers of today's session. It has been very interesting to get some further insight into the aspects of how to calculate GHG reduction from sustainable transport innovation. Thank you very much, Maria, for copying the email address in case anybody wants to contact Maria. So I will finalize the session for today. And please don't hesitate to get back into contact with us in case you want any further details. As mentioned already in the chat, we will upload the presentation for which we have authorization at this moment. There's just one that we cannot share at this very moment, but we will do it as soon as possible. The video will for sure be uploaded also to our entrance matchmaking platform. So please make sure to register there so you can download all of the information. And I guess all there's left is to thank you all and enjoy the afternoon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jeanette. Bye, everybody.
Bye.